Book 2, Canto 8. The Legend of Sir Guyon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, go to LibriVox.org. The Faerie Queene by Edmund Spenser. Book 2, The Legend of Sir Guyon, Canto 8. Sir Guyon, laid in swoon, is by Acrates' sons despoiled, whom Arthur soon hath rescued, and Paynim brethren foiled. Is there a care in heaven, and is there love in heavenly spirits to these creatures base, that may compassion of their evils move? There is, else much more wretched were the case of men than beasts. But oh, the exceeding grace of highest God, that loves his creatures so, and all his works with mercy doth embrace, that blessed angels he sends to and fro, to serve to wicked man, to serve his wicked foe. How oft do they their silver bowers leave, to come to succour us, that succour want? How oft do they with golden pinions cleave the flitting skies, like flying pursuivant, against foul fiends to aid us militant. They for us fight, they watch and duly ward, and their bright squadrons round about us plant, and all for love, and nothing for reward. O why should heavenly God to men have such regard? During the while that Guyon did abide in Mammon's house, the palmer, whom whileare that wanton maid of passage had denied, by further search had passage found elsewhere, and being on his way approached near, where Guyon lay in trance, when suddenly he heard a voice that called loud and clear, come hither, oh come hastily, that all the fields resounded with the rueful cry. The palmer lent his ear unto the noise, to weet who called so importunely. Again he heard a more efforced voice, that bade him come in haste. He by and by his feeble feet directed to the cry, which to that shady delve him brought at last, where Mammon erst did sun his treasury. There the good Guyon he found slumbering fast in senseless dream, which sight at first him sore aghast. Beside his head there sate a fair young man, of wondrous beauty and of freshest years, whose tender bud to blossom new began, and flourish fair above his equal peers. His snowy front curled with golden hairs, like Phoebus' face adorned with sunny rays, divinely shone, and two sharp winged shears, decked with divers plumes like painted jays, were fixed at his back to cut his airy ways. Like as Cupido on Idaean hill, when having laid his cruel bow away, and mortal arrows, wherewith he doth fill the world, with murderous spoils and bloody prey, with his fair mother he him dights to play, and with his goodly sisters Graces three. The goddess pleased with his wanton play, suffers herself through sleep beguiled to be, the whiles the other ladies mind their merry glee. Whom when the palmer saw, abashed he was, through fear and wonder, that he naught could say, till him the child bespoke, long lacked, alas, hath been thy faithful aid in hard assay, whiles deadly fit thy pupil doth dismay. Behold this heavy sight, thou reverend sire, but dread of death and dolour do away, for life ere long shall to her home retire, and he that breathless seemes shall courage bold respire. The charge with God doth unto me arret, of his dear safety I to thee commend, yet will I not forego, ne yet forget the care thereof myself unto the end, but evermore him succour and defend against his foe and mine. Watch thou, I pray, for evil is at hand him to offend. So having said, eftsoons he gan display his painted nimble wings, and vanished quite away. The Palmer, seeing his left empty place, and his slow eyes beguiled of their sight, woke sore afraid, and standing still a space, gazed after him as fowl escaped by flight. At last him turning to his charge behight, with trembling hand his troubled pulse gan try, where finding life not yet dislodged quite, he much rejoiced, and curd it tenderly, as chicken newly hatched from dreaded destiny. At last he spied, where towards him did pace 2 Paynim knights, all arm'd as bright as sky, and them beside an aged sire did trace, and far before a light foot page did fly, that breathed strife and troublous enmity. Those were the 2 sons of Acrates old, who meeting erst with Archimago sly, for by the idle strond of him were told, that he, which erst them combated, was Guyon bold, which to avenge on him they dearly vowed, wherever that on ground they mote him find. False Archimage provoked their courage proud, and strifeful aten in their stubborn mind coals of contention and hot violence tind. Now beene they come, whereas the Palmer sate, keeping that slumbered course to him assigned. Well knew they both his person, sith of late with him in bloody armes they rashly did debate. Whom when Pyrocles saw, inflamed with rage, that sire he foul bespake: Thou dotard vile, that with thy bruteness shenst thy comely age, abandon soon, I reed, the caitiff spoil of that same outcast carcass, that erewhile made itself famous through false treachery, and crowned his coward crest with knightly style. Lo, where he now inglorious doth lie, to prove he lived ill that did thus foully die. To whom the Palmer fearless answered: Certes, knight, ye been too much to blame, thus for to blot the honour of the dead, and with foul cowardice his carcass shame, whose living hands immortalized his name. Vile is the vengeance on the ashes cold, and envy base to bark at sleeping fame. Was never wight that treason of him told, yourself his prowess proved, and found him fierce and bold. Then said Cymocles: Palmer, thou dost dote, ne canst of prowess ne of knighthood deem, save as thou seest or hearest. But well I wote, that of his puissance trial made extreme, yet gold all is not that doth golden seem. Nay, all good knights that shake well spear and shield, the worth of all men by their end esteem, and then due praise or due reproach them yield. Bad therefore I him deem, that thus lies dead on field. Good or bad, gan his brother fierce reply, what do I reck, sith that he died entire? Or what doth his bad death now satisfy the greedy hunger of revenging ire, sith wrathful hand wrought not her own desire? Yet since no way is left to wreak my spite, I will him reave of armes the victor's hire, and of that shield more worthy of good knight. For why should a dead dog be decked in armour bright? Fair sir, said then the Palmer suppliant, for knighthoods love, do not so foul a deed, ne blame your honour with so shamefull vaunt of vile revenge. To spoil the dead of weed is sacrilege, and doth all sins exceed. But leave these relics of his living might, to deck his hearse, and trap his tomb black steed. What hearse or steed, said he, should he have dight, but be entombed in the raven or the kite? With that rude hand upon his shield he laid, and the other brother gan his helm unlace. Both fiercely bent to have him disarrayed, till that they spied, where towards them did pace an armed knight of bold and bounteous grace, whose squire bore after him an ebon lance and covered shield. Well kenned him so far space, the enchanter by his armes and amenance, when under him he saw his Libyan steed to prance. And to those brethren said, Rise, rise by live, and unto battle do yourselves address, for yonder comes the prowest knight alive, Prince Arthur, flower of grace and noblesse, that hath to Paynim knights wrought great distress, and 1,000 Sarazens foully done to die. That word so deep did in their hearts impress, that both eftsoons upstarted furiously, and gan themselves prepare to battle greedily. But fierce Pyrocles, lacking his own sword, the want thereof now greatly gan to plain, and Archimage besought him that afford, which he had brought for braggadocio vain. So would I, said the enchanter, glad and fain beteem to you this sword, you to defend, or aught that else your honour might maintain, but that this weapon's power I well have kend, to be contrary to the work which ye intend. For that same knight's own sword this is of yore, which Merlin made by his almighty art, for that his nursling, when he knighthood swore, therewith to doon his foes eternal smart. The metal first he mixt with medywart, that no enchantment from his dint might save. Then it in flames of Aetna wrought apart, and 7 times dipped in the bitter wave of hellish Styx, which hidden virtue to it gave. The virtue is that neither steel nor stone the stroke thereof from entrance may defend, ne ever may be used by his fone, ne forced his rightful owner to offend, ne ever will it break, ne ever bend. Wherefore more dure it rightfully is hight. In vain therefore, Pyrocles, should I lend the same to thee, against his lord to fight, for sure it would deceive thy labour and thy might. Foolish old man, said then the pagan wroth, that weenest words or charms may force withstand. Soon shalt thou see, and then believe for troth, that I can carve with this enchanted brand his lord's own flesh. Therewith out of his hand that virtuous steel he rudely snatched away, and Guyon's shield about his rest he bond. So ready dight, fierce battle to assay, and match his brother proud in batteilous array. By this that stronger knight in presence came, and goodly salved them, who not again him answered, as courtesy became, but with stern looks and stomachous disdain, gave signs of grudge and discontentment vain. Then turning to the palmer he gan spy, where at his feet with sorrowful demain and deadly hue an armed corse did lie, in whose dead face he read great magnanimity. Said he then to the palmer, Reverend sire, what great misfortune hath betid this knight? Or did his life her fatal date expire? Or did he fall by treason, or by fight? However sure I rue his piteous plight. Not one nor other, said the palmer grave, hath him befallen, but clouds of deadly night awhile his heavy eyelids covered have, and all his senses drowned in deep senseless wave. Which his cruel foes that stand hereby, making advantage to revenge their spite, would him disarm and treaten shamefully, unworthy usage of redoubted knight. But fare you, sir, whose honourable sight doth promise hope of help and timely grace, mote I beseech to succour his sad plight, and by your power protect his feeble case. First praise of knighthood is, foul outrage to deface. Palmer, said he, no knight so rude I ween, as to do an outrage to a sleeping ghost. Ne was there ever noble courage seen, that in advantage would his puissance boast. Honour is least where odds appeareth most. May be that better reason will assuage the rash revenger's heat. Words well disposed have secret power to appease inflamed rage, if not leave unto me thy knight's last patronage. Though turning to those brethren thus bespoke, Ye warlike pair, whose valorous great might, it seemes, just wrongs to vengeance do provoke, to wreak your wrath on this dead seeming knight, mote aught allay the storm of your despight, and settle patience in so furious heat? Not to debate the challenge of your right, but for this carcass pardon I entreat, whom fortune hath already laid in lowest seat. To whom Caemocles said, For what art thou, that makes thyself his daysman, to prolong the vengeance prest? Or who shall let me now on this vile body from to wreak my wrong, and make his carcass as the outcast dung? Why should not that dead carrion satisfy the guilt, which if he lived had thus long, his life for due revenge should dear aby? The trespass still doth live, albe the person die. Indeed, then said the Prince, the evil done dies not, when breath the body first doth leave, but from the grandsire to the nephew's son, and all his seed the curse doth often cleave, till vengeance utterly the guilt bereave. So straitly God doth judge. But gentle knight, that doth against the dead his hand uprear, his honour stains with rancour and despite, and great disparagement makes to his former might. Pyrocles gan reply the second time, and to him said, Now, felon, sure I read that thou art partaker of his crime, therefore by Termagaunt thou shalt be dead. With that his hand more sad than lump of lead, uplifting high, he weened with more dure, his own good sword more dure to cleave his head. The faithful steel such treason gnawed endure, but swerving from the mark, his lord's life did assure. Yet was the force so furious and so fell, that horse and man it made to reel aside. Natheless the Prince would not forsake his cell, for well of yore he learned had to ride, but full of anger fiercely to him cried, False traitor, miscreant, thou broken hast the law of arms, to strike foe undefied. But thou thy treason's fruit, I hope, shalt taste right sour, and feel the law, the which thou hast defaced. With that his baleful spear he fiercely bent against the pagan's breast, and therewith thought his cursed life out of her lodge have rent. But ere the point arrived where it ought, that sevenfold shield, which he from Guyon brought, he cast between to ward the britter stound. Through all those folds the steel had passage wrought, and through his shoulder pierced, wherewith to ground he grovelling fell, all gored in his gushing wound. Which when his brother saw, fraught with great griefe and wrath, he to him leaped furiously, and foully said, By Mahone, cursed thief, that direful stroke thou dearly shalt aby. Then hurling up his harmful blade on high, smote him so hugely on his haughty crest, that from his saddle forced him to fly. Else mote it needs down to his manly breast have cleft his head in twain, and life thence dispossest. Now was the Prince in dangerous distress, wanting his sword, when he on foot should fight. His single spear could do him small redress against two foes of so exceeding might, the least of which was match for any knight. And now the other, whom he erst did daunt, had reared himself again to cruel fight, 3 times more furious and more puissant, unmindful of his wound, of his fate ignorant. So both at once him charge on either side, with hideous strokes and importable powre, that forced him his ground to traverse wide, and wisely watch to ward that deadly stowre. For in his shield, as thick as stormy showre, their strokes did rain, yet did he never quaile, ne backward shrink, but as a steadfast towre, whom foe with double batt'ry doth assaile, them on her bulwark bears, and bids them naught availe. So stoutly he withstood their strong assay, till that at last, when he advantage spied, his poignant spear he thrust with puissant sway at proud Caemocles, whiles his shield was wide, that through his thigh the mortal steel did gride. He, swarving with the force within his flefh, did breake the lance, and let the head abide. Out of the wound the red blood flowed frefh, that underneath his feet soon made a purple plefh. Horribly then he gan to rage and raile, cursing his Gods and himfelfe damning deepe. Als when his brother faw the red blood raile adown so fast, and all his armour fteepe, for very fellneffe loud he gan to weepe, and said, Caitive, curfe on thy cruel hand, that twice hath sped, yet shall it not thee keepe from the third brunt of this my fatall brond. Lo, where the dreadful death behind thy backe doth stand. With that he ftrooke, and th'other ftrooke withal, that nothing feemed mote beare so monftrous might. The one upon his covered fhield did fall, and glauncing down would not his owner bite. But the other did upon his truncheon fmite, which hewing quite asunder further way it made, and on his hacqueton did light. The which dividing with importune fway, it feized in his right fide, and there the dent did ftay. Wide was the wound, and a large lukewarme flood, red as the rofe, thence gufhed grievoufly, that when the Paynim fpide the ftreaming blood, gave him great heart and hope of vidtory. On th'other fide, in huge perplexity, the Prince now stood, having his weapon broke. Naught could he hurt, but ftill at ward did lie, yet with his truncheon he fo rudely ftroke Chymocles twice, that twice him forced his foot revoke. Whom when the Palmer faw in fuch diftrefle, Sir Guion's fword he lightly to him raught, and faid, Faire fon, great God thy right hand blefle, to ufe that fword fo wifely as is ought. Glad was the knight, and with frefh courage fraught, when as againe he armed felt his hand. Then like a lion, which hath long time fought his robbed whelps, and at last them fond amongft the fhepherds fwaines, then wexeth wood and yond. So fierce he layd about him, and dealt blowes on either fide, that neither maile could hold, ne fhield defend the thunder of his throwes. Now to Pyrocles many ftrokes he told, eft to Chymocles twice so many fold. Then back againe turning his busie hand, them both at once compelled with courage bold, to yield wide way to his heart thrilling brond. And though they both stood ftiffe, yet could not both withftond. As falvage bull, whom two fierce maftives bayte, when rancour doth with rage him once engore, forgets with wary ward them to awayte, but with his dreadfull horns them drives afore, or flings aloft, or treads down in the floor, breathing out wrath and bellowing difdaine, that all the forrest quakes to hear him roare. So raged Prince Arthur twixt his foemen twaine, that neither could his mighty puifance fuftaine. But ever at Pyrocles, when he smit, who Guion's fhield caft ever him before, whereon the Faerie Queenes portract was writ, his hand relented, and the ftroke forbore, and his deare heart the picture gan adore, which oft the Paynim faved from deadly ftore. But him henceforth the fame can fave no more, for now arrived is his fatall houre, that note avoided be by earthly skill or powre. For when Chymocles faw the foule reproch, which them appeached, pricked with guilty fhame and inward griefe, he fiercely gan approch, resolved to put away that loathly blame, or die with honour and defert of fame. And on the hauberk ftroke the Prince so fore, that quite difparted all the linked frame, and pierced to the skin, but bit no more, yet made him twice to reele, that never moved afore. Whereat rin fierced with wrath and sharp regret, he ftroke so hugely with his borrowed blade, that it empierced the Pagans burgonet, and cleaving the hard steele did deepe invade into his head, and cruel passage made quite through his braine. He tumbling downe on ground, breathed out his ghoft, which to the infernal fhade fast flying, there eternal torment found, for all the finnes wherewith his lewd life did abound. Which when his German faw, the stony feare ran to his heart, and all his fence dismayd, ne thenceforth life, ne courage did appeare, but as a man whom hellifh fiends have frayd. Long trembling ftill he stood, at last thus fayd: Traytor, what haft thou done? How ever may thy curfed hand so cruelly have fwayd againft that knight, hero and well away, after so wicked deed? Why liv'st thou longer day? With that all defperate as loathing light, and with revenge defiring foone to die, affembling all his force and utmoft might, with his owne fword he fierce at him did fly, and ftrooke, and foyned, and lafht outrageoufly, withouten reafon or regard. Well knew the Prince, with patience and fufferance fly, so hafty heat foone cooled to fubdew, though when this breathlefle wokes that battell gan renew. As when a windy tempest bloweth high, that nothing may withstand his stormy ftowre, the clouds, as things afrayd, before him fly. But all fo foone as his outrageous powre is layd, they fiercely then begin to fhowre, and as in fcorne of his spent stormy fpight, now all at once their malice forth do powre. So did Prince Arthur beare himfelfe in fight, and suffered rafh Pyrocles waft his idle might. At last, when as the Saracen perceived how that ftraunge fword refused to ferve his need, but when he ftroke most ftrong the dent deceived, he flung it from him, and devoyd of dread, upon him lightly leaping without heed, twixt his two mighty armes engrasped fast, thinking to overthrow and down him tread. But him in ftrength and skill the Prince furpaft, and through his nimble flight did under him down caft. Naught booted it the paine him then to ftrive, for as a bitter in the eagles claw, that may not hope by flight to fcape alive, still waits for death with dread and trembling awe. So he now subject to the victors law, did not once move nor upward cast his eye, for vile disdaine and rancour, which did gnaw his heart in twain with sad melancholy, as one that loathed life, and yet despised to die. But full of princely bounty and great mind, the conqueror naught carried him to slay, but casting wrongs and all revenge behind, more glory thought to give life than decay, and said: Paynim, this is thy dismal day, yet if thou wilt renounce thy miscreants, and my true liegeman yield thyself for aye, life will I graunt thee for thy valiance, and all thy wrongs will wipe out of my souvenaunce. Fool, said the pagan, I thy gift defy, but use thy fortune as it doth befall, and say that I not overcome do die, but in despite of life for death do call. Wroth was the Prince, and sorry yet withal, that he so wilfully refused grace, yet sith his fate so cruelly did fall, his shining helmet he gan soon unlace, and left his headless body bleeding all the place. By this Sir Guyon from his trance awaked, life having mastred her senseless foe, and looking up, when as his shield he lacked, and sword saw not, he wexed wondrous woe. But when the palmer, whom he long ago had lost, he by him spied, right glad he grew, and said: Dear Sir, whom wandering to and fro I long have lacked, I joy thy face to view. Firm is thy faith, whom danger never fro me drew. But read what wicked hand hath robbed me of my good sword and shield. The palmer glad, with so fresh hue uprising him to see, him answered: Fair son, be no whit sad for want of weapons, they shall soon be had. So gan he to discourse the whole debate, which that straunch knight from him sustained had, and those two Saracens confounded late, whose carcasses on ground were horribly prostrate. Which when he heard and saw the tokens true, his heart with great affection was embayed, and to the Prince bowing reverence due, as to the patron of his life thus said: My lord, my liege, by whose most gracious aid I live this day, and see my foes subdued, what may suffice to be for meed repaid of so great graces as ye have me shewed, but to be ever bound. To whom the infant thus: Fair sir, what need good turns be counted as a servile bond to bind their doers, to receive their meed? Are not all knights by oath bound to withstand oppressor's power by arms and puissant hand? Suffice that I have done my due in place. So goodly purpose they together fond of kindness and of courteous agrace. The whiles false Archimage and Aton fled apace. End of Book 2, Canto 8. The Legend of Sir Guyon.